You ready for this mic?
He's not ready to go because there's enough of those people.
Busse.
Hi.
Busse.
You have to be careful with me because I'm always dizzy. I have what do you call it? Vertigo.
Hey.
Yeah, so don't push me.
No
Anyway,
pushing.
big hug.
Wow. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. So the first thing will be Anna Maria and I will go with you, and then I will see you in Paris. How's that?
I got my, but thank you.
Yes, you do. Wherever you want for the moment, and I'll reconfigure things as they need to be reconfigured. See, there we all are.
You were looking for me earlier. Yeah. Be very quick. Yeah.
Oh, well, no point in doing a message because I'm the only one watching.
You know, Phil, you guys are. Carl, can you give the book, one book to Hollinger? He's here because he wanted a book.
We can do that ceremoniously if you like. Or
David.
maybe not. Hello, David.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Oh, here we go. So we'll just sit here? Where am I
Yeah,
sit?
that's perfect.
That's perfect, yeah.
All right.
And you know Beth Levy?
You can
We
sit
do.
anywhere.
Good to see you.
She was in your lectures at
You wouldn't remember.
but
I
you know
audited one of your
but you know-
classes. It was
But
a
you know
very,
what she
I
said
didn't have
about
gray
them,
hair.
David? I thought that was the nice thing. She loved your lectures, and she said, but that's not all. She said he managed to have a lecture finished the topic exactly on time.
Yeah, I
He's
did
the
that.
only,
You remember
yeah,
that?
he's
Work of
the
art.
only one where.
It was a work of art. I've never seen
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
like it.
yeah. And she was so impressed.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah, and we are so happy that we have this American West music historian here. This is fantastic.
For this,
Yeah.
I'll turn this thing
Yes,
off so it doesn't
absolutely.
ring on me.
Right, so I think we're going to get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Henry Spiller, and it was my great honor and pleasure to co-edit this beautiful book. I co-edited it with my wonderful, esteemed colleague, Anna Maria Busse Berger, and this started out as a project funded by the Luce Foundation, where we were interested in looking at how missionaries interacted with music in Indonesia, and also with ethnomusicologists, comparative musicologists, ethnologists, anthropologists, whatever you want to call them, government employees, to see what sorts of information we could dredge out of the record of that. And we have amazing results. We have hundreds and hundreds of pages there, and we're really excited to know that we've only scratched the surface. So first of all, let me tell you there is a flyer over there on the table there that has a QR code. And with that QR code, you can get to the UC website, the UC Press website, where you can download this book for free. This is an open access book, which is a really amazing, wonderful thing. Yay. And of course, if you really want, you can get this beautiful hard copy as well. Here, I have the live stream. I think I'm the only person watching the live stream at the moment, so I will turn the sound down. Anyway, I would encourage you to actually download the book now, because there will be little quiz questions peppered through the presentation, and there will be valuable prizes for whoever can come up with the answer to those quiz questions. They're not going to be hard questions. I mean, most of you, I'm looking around, I think most of you can probably figure out how to answer these questions. If you don't want to download the book, there are a few copies lying around, and you're welcome to pick it up. And does anybody know what an index is? You can look things up in the index if you want. It's a very crude tool, but it works. So please feel free to download the book. You can also get 30% off your hard copy with this flyer. So there's one of those codes down there. Right. So let's see. So I want to say that, first of all, my esteemed colleague Anna Maria Busse Berger is here with us, and we have 3 authors from the collection here as well. David Hollinger from UC Berkeley, who wrote one of the essays, Kathy Foley from UC Santa Cruz, and Dustin Wiebe, who is an independent scholar, I'll say now, unless you yeah, even better.
Yeah. And it's going really well.
Yeah. And Dustin is actually doing Gamelan workshops at his elementary school, which I'm really happy about. So again, the open access thing is really important. We got a note from this morning from the person whose note I've lost, from the library. Oh, you've got it. From the library, saying how excited he is that there's an open access book. And we also have Michael Laddish from the library, who helped us get the funding to make this book an open access. And I was hoping you could say something up here, or I have a microphone here. Yeah. Yes. And speak straight into it there, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just the camera. Yes, so I'm Michael Laddish from the library as Scholarly Communication Officer, and I'm very pleased that this book is published in open access. We, in the library, we support open access publishing, we provide funding, we encourage scholars to publish journal articles and indeed also books, scholarly books in open access, because of all the benefits that you probably know. So you get tons of downloads from scholars and other interested people all over the world. Classroom use for the books is much easier. Students don't have to purchase the book. And especially with an edited volume, they can just download a specific chapter that they want to assign as reading. And last but not least, people all over the world can access. So for this book, folks in Indonesia and in Indonesian archipelago, I should say, are able to access it, to read this thing for free. And I'm glad that this is available, and I'm also grateful to UC Press, with which we work quite often, and they're very great in that. So yes, thank you, and thanks for the contributor for agreeing to publish open access, and I'm looking forward to a nice event here and hear more about the content. You know.
All right. All right. Oh, right. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And to start things off, I've asked Anna Maria to say a little bit about the overall theme of the book. She did this spiels for me the other day on the phone, and I thought it was fantastic. So take it away, Anna Maria.
So, of course, missionaries used to be a highly controversial topic, but never for me, because I should start out by saying that my father was originally a missionary before the war in Tanzania. It was then Tanganyika. And he was both a missionary and had a PhD in African studies and anthropology. So he did major linguistic work and Bible translations and things like that. So he always told me about all these important scholars who did scholarly work in connection with their missionary work. So for me, it was never a controversial topic. But in 2011, I suddenly received an email from the music editor in Cambridge University Press that Rachel Beckles-Wilson, whom you might remember, she also wrote a great book on Krotak, wanted to write a book with missionaries as the title. And Cambridge thought it was inappropriate, and they didn't think it was a good title to have missionaries in the title. There was a non-starter. And of course, I was already working on my last book, and I said, it's a great title, and it should be there. And Rachel managed to publish it under the title Orientalism and Musical Mission, Palestine and the West. So I don't know how well the book did, but that was, I think, the first major university press with a mission title. Well, when I read a paper from my last book about 3 years ago in London, I was asked by Julia Bile, who is one of the authors in our present volume, whether I have ever been attacked for working on missionaries. And I thought for a moment, and I said, you know, people have generally been very nice, but there was one occasion when I was at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Berlin, the Wissenschaftskolleg, where there was an anthropologist who attacked me. He said, how can you even deal with notes taken by missionaries? They are so biased. And I knew then and there that it was still a loaded topic. That was in 2015. So I thought that was quite characteristic. And Julia, I think, had probably, she's a specialist on missionaries in Indonesia. She probably encountered similar issues. But I think now the situation has really changed. I think people are starting to understand, and Henry found this important article which we put into our introduction, that anthropologists are just as biased as missionaries, and they are really, they couldn't have done, neither of them could have done their work without the others. So in general, when we address issues in our book, there are two fundamental topics for those who deal with missionaries and anthropologists. And I think these are very important in many of the articles in our book. The first one is, what kind of ethnographic observations did the missionaries make during their stay? And it turns out there's quite a lot. Look at Henry's article, for example, or at Dustin's article. There's lots of stuff there. And then the second one, which I think is becoming more and more of a hot topic now, is what kind of music did they introduce in the countries where they went? And how did it fare there? Did the local population take it over? Did they make it their own, or did they reject it? And I think this, I think in recent years, this is, especially because of the work of Kofi Agavu, has become a very important topic. So these are essentially the two topics we are addressing there. Okay, so I think that's about it.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
So thank you.
yeah.
So I'd like to just give you an idea of what's going to happen for the next 40 minutes or so. We'll see how long it goes. You know what happens when you put scholars at a table. We're going to have two sort of round tables. The first one will focus on kind of articles in the book about missionaries versus and ethnographers. And the second one will focus on anthropology and relativism, which has been a goal or a value in anthropology or ethnography for a long time, and how that's going these days. So there may be time for some general question and answer. There will hopefully be food by the time we're done with this. And then I hope most of you are aware that at 6 p.m., Gamelan Sari Raras from UC Berkeley will be presenting a short wayang kulit performance in the Pitzer, the main stage in Pitzer there, which will be an hour to hour and 20 minutes long. You'll be home in time for a late dinner if you want to stick around for it. They've been working really hard on this, so it would be really worth sticking around for. But before I convene the first panel, I thought maybe we could have our first quiz question. Did anybody actually download the book yet? And if not, if you want to look in the index or the table of contents in this case, you can. So the question is, are you ready for this? Who is the author whose last name comes last in the alphabet? Do, 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 do. Jan Polsky, we have a winner. Big round of applause. And your valuable prize is a wayang keychain. So can you pass that around? You can all take a look at it. Decide whether you want to answer the next question or not. All right, so our first panel will feature co-editor Anna Maria Busse, David Hollinger, who will be interlocuted. Did I just make that word up? Will be interlocuted by Beth Levy, who's my colleague here in the music department at UC Davis. She will also sort of MC this particular panel, whatever that means. We'll also include our other musicology colleague, Pier Paolo Polzinetti, who will interact with Anna Maria's article. And then finally, Dustin Wiebe will sit on this panel, and Anna Maria will get the opportunity to tease some thoughts out of Dustin. So with no further ado, we hope this will take about 20 minutes all told. So get out your stopwatch, Beth. And we can reconfigure all the 5 of you along here. There's a 5th microphone here if we need it.
Yes, so we can share. All right, is this microphone to be turned on? Am I on? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be part of this event and to be sitting next to so many renowned scholars, including David Hollinger, a former president of the Organization of American Historians, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the author of recent books on U.S. missionaries and their work abroad. It's a wonderful chapter. That was my assignment. I feel lucky. But it's a wonderful project as a whole, and so I want to extend my congratulations to the editors and the authors who are here, in particular because of the interdisciplinary range that this topic, missionaries, has caused to coalesce in this volume. So representing one flank of that interdisciplinary range is Professor Hollinger as historian. I really enjoyed this chapter, in part for the broadening of geographical scope that it offers, as it focuses on U.S. missionary work primarily in the Philippines and in Thailand, to show how these missionaries, while sometimes inspired or funded by colonial and even imperial enterprises, also surprisingly often became anti-imperialists. These are your words, anti-imperialists, critics of all the colonial empires, and vociferous opponents of white supremacy. It's a great read, so when you've got the QR code in hand, I encourage you to look for some of the wonderful turns of phrase. I believe I will never again think of missionaries except as the bullfighters of Protestantism, which made me laugh out loud, quite wonderful. And the idea of the gospel as a boomerang that was thrown across the sea and returned with all of this unexpected baggage. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about the literacy work that is at the heart of what Frank Laubach was doing in the Philippines. It's so impressive in terms of the reach that it had. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how this compares with other literacy work in the field, whether in Indonesia or elsewhere. What made it so tremendously effective? Was it, grassroots in a way that was particularly anti-imperial, or not? Were there particular technologies that came together in his time and place to give this work such tremendous reach?
The people who talk about the history of literacy are very clear that Laubach did something that was, at the time, very new. In the 1920s, 1930s, he developed what he called each one, teach one. Now, the idea was that everybody in the world would find somebody that didn't know how to read and teach them to do it. Now, this is very labor intensive because most people learn languages by going to a class, so forth. This is one-on-one, and it's also not professional. It's sort of like anybody who knows the language, find somebody else and teach them how to do it. So it was counterintuitive in a lot of ways, but it turned out to work. And so there are many hundreds of thousands, millions of people that are said to have been taught how to read with this method. He develops it in the late 20s, publishes a lot on it, and many people developed this institution around it. Many volumes now have been written about it. He got honorary degrees from Columbia and Princeton and a lot of people because it was very widely recognized outside the missionary context. And indeed, Laubach came up with this idea during a crisis of faith when he was a Congregationalist missionary to the Philippines, and he'd been there for several years in the 1920s, wasn't able to generate any converts, and at that time, this was the big thing. You're supposed to make them like us, so to speak, make the people that you discover abroad, these indigenous types, make them more like the Congregationalists of Dubuque and Des Moines and so forth. Now, that didn't work for him. And so he went to the mountaintop and engaged in earnest prayer. Now, he alleges, this is somewhat like Saul on the road to Damascus, he alleges that God struck him down and spoke to him and explained, Laubach, your problem is that you're a racist. You don't actually love these people. If you really did love them, they would come around. However, interestingly, the Lord also had some specific advice for this guy. And instead of just going back and demonstrating his love through a more earnest preaching, and some of the missionaries did that, Laubach decided with the counsel of the Lord to entirely change the approach and teach these people how to read. Now, literacy is not religiously defined. It's something that secular people can do it. Atheists can learn to read. So what he did was to emancipate the service impulse, this generous idea that we need to help everybody else by making them like us, and instead help them by being able to do their own thing, by learning their own language and be able to read in it and to write in it. So it was grounded in the classic social gospel Protestantism of the period, but it expressed itself through this quite remarkable, counterintuitive, person-to-person, highly Gemeinschafty type of methods, and it worked. Now, shortly before Laubach died, there was another very important literacy reformer from Brazil, Paulo Freire, and he has cut a huge swath in literacy during the last 40 or 50 years. It does not diminish his work in any way to say that before he came along, Laubach was the go-to guy for literacy throughout the world. in all languages. So it's a case of where the missionary impulse generated something that was deeply non-religious in its character, potentially secular, but yet the drive behind it was very spiritual. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have many other questions, but I think it's probably my duty to pass the mic down the line, make sure that everyone has a chance to pose at least one question to their interlocutor, and then we'll have some time, hopefully, at the end for your discussion. Do you want to switch places with me? Or do you...
Yeah, no, thank you, Anna Maria. To reread you made me feel that you were still present here with us. From your introduction, it sounds like you are committed to this theme of the missionaries and performing some sort of apology of the missionaries. But the article I found it very well balanced in the argument. It starts with Jaap Koonst visiting the mission of Nias, or Nias, in the late 1930, and he criticizes the work of missionaries for the destruction they cause to the local culture. On the other hand, all the information he gets about the local traditional culture comes from the missionaries, who were trained with a general theory called missiology by Gustav Warneck, that encouraged the preservation of local traditions. Yet, as you document, in the beginning of the centuries, missionaries destroyed physically artifacts and performed acts of cultural violence and erasure. This bipolar Christian disorder is clear to us. I mean, I grew up, in Rome, where the Christians clearly destroyed classical culture, but at the same time preserved it. And I want to quote one line from your essay, and you write, while conservation to Christianity by the missionaries resulted in the destruction of local artifacts, without these missionaries, there would be very little left. And I want to emphasize this complex picture that you portray, that is, emerges elsewhere in the book, of a general trend and then so many diversified local realities. Missionaries who are really in love with local culture, who have deep respect, and others less. And we tend to be more, polarized in this, are missionaries good? Are they bad, But my question has to do with the filtration process that this ambivalence of admiration, repulsion causes on the preservation of the local cultures. And specifically, what kind of ethnographic work these missionaries actually do, perform, and how, when they preserved local traditions, what was the filtration or their biases? If related to that, did they introduce their own music to the local people, and was that a replacement or a form of syncretic process?
Thank you so much, Pier Paolo. So I think you outlined it very well, that the picture is very complex. I think missionaries are, the whole topic of missionaries is very complex. They did good things like spreading literacy and bringing healthcare and so on, and they destroyed local culture, absolutely. But also, they brought lots of these little atsu, these little artworks, which were heathen in origins. They are the ones who saved them and brought them in great quantities to Europe. So without them, there would be much less of them around. Now, concerning your question about the music, I think they came in the 1890s, and at that point, none of the mission societies were even thinking of introducing local music. I think the earliest I am aware of is in 1905, 1906 in Tanzania, and it didn't work very well. And then in the 1920s, 30s in Tanzania again, and it was a complete failure. So nobody thought of introducing local music. Once they thought of introducing, so what they did were the Western hymns and chorales in great quantities, and there's an enormous singing tradition in Nias and Sumatra from these very same missionaries whom Jaap Kunst criticized so horribly, but they have really made it their own, and they have fantastic choirs now. They travel all over the world, and they're very successful. So I think that's true. Now, I think in the 1930s, I think some missionaries wanted to introduce local music and also try to preserve local rituals or try to redo them in a way which the local population would understand. And they were very much opposed by the first generation of Christians in Nias who didn't want that, the evangelists. And they were so happy that they had left all these heathen practices behind, and they absolutely didn't want them reintroduced. So I think out of respect for them, this was just not a possibility. So I think that's essentially the answer to your question. Okay, I think we should move on to Dustin, who's here. Dustin, you have written a comprehensive chapter, and it deals with Jaap Kunst, who my chapter deals to, but in a completely different way. Jaap Kunst in my chapter was highly critical of the missionaries, and in Dustin's chapter, he became a very close friend to a missionary called Piet Herkens, so much so that after Piet Herkens' death, he published one of the books of the songs of Piet Herkens. It became a very productive friendship. Now, I would like to ask you, can you tell us, and then in addition, what I found very impressive about your article is the modernity of Piet Herkens. Since Dustin is an ethnomusicologist, he has an excellent discussion of the phonogram and how we would approach this phonogram today, and where Piet Herkens turns out to be very modern. So I would like you to talk about Piet Herkens' background and this whole culture. Why did Jaap Kunst like him so much and admire him so much? And then about the contemporary, what makes him such a contemporary presence, why he shouldn't be forgotten.
Okay.
Yeah.
Piet Herkens, he was raised in a Catholic tradition. The Fathers of the Divine Word, so the Society of the Divine Word, the SVD is the common abbreviation. It was an order, a Catholic order that was established in the late 19th century by a gentleman, Arnold Janssen was his name. And it was founded on principles whereby the missionaries were trained in a variety of different academic subjects, including anthropology. I believe they even looked at things like astronomy, history, and Janssen encouraged the fathers that trained in his order to pursue higher education where they were interested. And there are several SVD priests who became very well-known scholars in Europe. And while Herkens wasn't necessarily one of the scholars that became very well-known, he was definitely, he had scholarly inclinations. He had received some basic anthropology training while he was at the seminary. So when he got the job to go to Flores, he immediately began recording the different musical traditions that he encountered there. And unlike most ethnomusicologists, comparative musicologists, I guess they were called, at that time, he was very apprehensive about the phonograph. He thought that the phonograph had the potential to become a very, potentially very dangerous instrument, whereby scholars might misrepresent traditions, they might misunderstand traditions, and that those misunderstandings would become codified in the sound recordings that people would make. And I believe most of what he knew about phonographs he learned from Jaap Kunst on Jaap Kunst's trip to Flores in 1930, where the two worked very closely together. Kunst not only worked closely with Herkens, but also many other SVD priests that were stationed across Flores. Kunst basically started on the east side of Flores and worked west and documented as many traditions as he could as he moved across the island. And it was only with the cooperation of the missionaries that were working throughout the island that he was able to do this. Even after getting some rudimentary training on the phonograph, he was still very apprehensive about it, again, just because of the reasons that I've already mentioned. And he really advocated an approach to methodology whereby the phonograph would take either sort of a back, a roll to the side, or maybe, I mean, in his case, he didn't even entertain it. He basically transcribed the music and conducted his interviews, and that was more or less the extent of his research. Now, there are times when I kind of wish that maybe he had made some recordings, but I think in sort of maintaining that position, I think he created a very poignant sort of a critique of the phonograph, and because that was the basis of comparative musicology was the phonograph. So for him to take this position was quite radical at the time, and I think I mentioned in the article that I think when I read Herken's ideas, they resonate with me more in terms of what I've learned in my graduate seminars, rather than something I would expect a missionary to be concerned about in the early 20th century.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So should we move on? Okay.
I can move us on. We have time at the very end for the floor to be open, or do we want the floor to be?
If there is a question now,
There is.
Thank you all for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. I was especially interested in the conversation about literacy, Laubach, and the Lord.
Yes.
And I wonder if the Lord suggested that perhaps he take as a model the efforts of missionaries, Spanish missionaries in the Americas, who also taught literacy, musical literacy. They often had populations who spoke already an indigenous language, but were also obliged to learn Latin, Spanish. Some note reading, again, depending on what the individual population might, what might be best for them or what they were receptive to.
Laubach was a very good Protestant.
That was my suspicion.
In the strongest sense of the word. He had no patience whatsoever for most Catholics. Now, he gradually learned that Catholics were okay in the same way that Muslims were, but you have to understand that this guy begins with a fairly straightforward social gospel congregationalism. Now, the liberal Protestants like him were particularly aware of the role of the Catholic Church in Latin America in doing less wholesome things than those that you talk about. So the image of Catholics in Latin America was extremely hostile on the part of all these liberal Protestants, really right down until the 1950s or 60s, and the greatest of the liberation theologians prior to Cone were Protestant missionaries from Latin America who got all of their moxie from their hatred of Catholics. So I don't want to give him credit for the level of ecumenism that you might generously be inclined to attribute to him. His ecumenism expressed itself much more in the claim that Jesus Christ was an Asian, and that the Asian peoples would take over the leadership of Christianity. His sense of Christianity was, I say, very deeply Protestant. Toward the end of his life, he came to tolerate a little bit more Catholics. But the answer to your question is that this might have been a wonderful resource for him, but he didn't do much with it.
Right. Well, one wouldn't want to downplay the atrocities committed by the Spanish, but neither would one want to exaggerate the black legend and its stereotypes.
Okay, the degree of truth of the black legend is highly contentious.
Yes. Anyway, thank you. That was very interesting.
I want to add something to that very quickly. I think this is entirely true of also in Africa. There was a big hostility between Catholics and Protestants, and exchange when we were in Africa in the 60s when John the 23rd became Pope. Suddenly they started talking to each other. It was quite amazing,
I'll just add one thing that I think we're all familiar with. Hochschild's book on King Leopold's ghost, and the scholars that have studied this have established overwhelmingly that the Catholic missionaries supported the Belgian government. All of the stories, all of the reports that were sympathetic with the indigenous Congolese were developed by American, German, and French and Dutch Protestants, actually.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
We might have time for one more question before we move on. What would you prefer? I can pose a question.
Let's move on.
Let's move on.
And I didn't see a question offhand, so let's move on and thank this panel, our first panel. That was. I'm only a little surprised it sort of went the way that I thought it might. That's really great. So our next panel will feature Kathy Foley, me, Scott Linford, and Juan Diego Diaz. So if I could ask the people currently there to vacate and the rest of us to take over there. And while everyone's resettling, we'll do our second quiz question. Are you all excited? Marion, are you ready? All right, so the question is, name one of the authors who writes about Indonesian adaptations of European hymns. I didn't write about that. Any answers? Just yell it out if you've got it. Sorry? Did he? That's not one on my list, but we'll give you a prize anyway. Any others? Yeah, sort of. All right, 2 prizes. Unfortunately, and bile. Yes, and unfortunately, it's the same prize as last time. But here you go. This is a beautiful wayang keychain. And will you pass this one down that way over there to our prize winner or whoever wants to grab it? Okay, you're really going to love the third question, so stick around. And Juan Diego, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am.
All right, let's get this second panel going then. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Henry. So welcome, everyone. So I was tasked with reading my esteemed colleague Henry Spiller's article, which is entitled, I am in no way surprised that the Javanese can listen to it all night long, end quote. A 19th century Dutch missionary on Javanese music. So this was a really, really interesting piece that is completely sort of encapsulates the topic of the book, that dual position of missionary, that missionaries are between being on the one hand missionaries, the people of God, and on the other hand, these anthropologists documenting what the culture that they were encountering when they went to these remote locations. In order to do this, Henry focused on a particular individual, Henrik Smeding. Smeding, Henry Smeding, a 19th century Protestant missionary who went to East Java between 1858 and 1861. And wrote a number of articles and various publications where... Closer? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so based, using James Clifford's writings on that sort of tension between these individuals as missionaries and anthropologists, he analyzed this Smeating as on the one hand as a missionary and on the one as an anthropologist. So there are sections discussing that, and I was surprised by all the detail that he documented as an anthropologist, as he put it, and like really giving a lot of attention to the music, describing scales, tuning systems, descriptions of instruments that are, I mean, it's like the best of the work that ethnomusicologists could do. On the one hand, he had a love for the music that was incredible, and but at the same time, as a missionary, he thought that this music wasn't fit for Christian liturgy. And so that in a section that Henry titled Smeating as Missionary and an Anthropologist, he explains what the reasons why this person decided that this music wasn't really fit for Christian liturgy and associations to dance and all that. But there's one sentence that I found fascinating, and that's actually, I would like you to elaborate on that, Henry. You're right. While he, Smeating, praises the practice of tembang, which is a style of singing, he ultimately advocates against the push to incorporate tembang into Christian worship, not because it is sinful or pagan, as asserted by other missionaries, but because adapting it to the requirements of Christian worship would compromise tembang's aesthetic integrity. So I'm not surprised that some missionaries found this incompatibility between local traditions and Christianity, but I'm surprised by and quite moved actually by his stance. He's basically saying that not even that his admiration for this music is such that he's not even willing to allow it to be part of the Christian liturgy, which one would assume is the most dignified context in which this music could be performed, because it would compromise the integrity of the genre. So I would like you to speak a little more about that admiration and that how he arrived to that kind of love and passion for this music.
I'll do my best. I'm not sure. I mean, I do think that he appreciated the music. Love and passion may be an exaggeration. But I think that he arrived at this understanding of tembang as not being appropriate for worship, in part through talking to his parishioners, talking to the people that he was working with, because they thought that all of the beautiful stuff about tembang is not stuff that you can sing with other people. It's individual ornaments that make tembang beautiful and exciting, individual expression, rhythmic flexibility in the moment, etc., and that is not something that congregational singing is really very good for. And at least in the Protestant denomination, solo singing isn't always all that good for worship either. I mean, people like it, but it doesn't really help people create a sense of Christian community. So I think that he got those ideas not from his own love or innate appreciation of tembang, but rather in coming to understand ethnographically how other people found it valuable and beautiful. And so he took the values that he got out of the culture and then applied those to his own estimation of it. I should note that the article by Ben Arps that's in the same section also deals with this very same topic, but on a much broader scale. Ben talks about how later on in the 19th century, all the Dutch mission societies were trying to come together to find a common way of promoting and standardizing church music for Protestants in the Indonesian archipelago. And this was one of the controversies of whether tembang was something that was to be forbidden, something to be used for education, say, but not but definitely not for worship. So it was a big question for everybody. And you might hear, if you come to the Wayang, you won't hear timbang singing, but you'll hear the kind of variability and solo ornamentation that may have caught his fancy. I have to say I was really impressed with the way Smeding observed all of these musical performances so carefully and wrote down details, as he pointed out, Juan Diego, that I find really valuable 175 years later, because they're really quite different from the kinds of standardized information about Javanese music that Jaap Kunst, for example, standardized in the 1930s and beyond. So it's a different layer and a different way of engaging with music that in some ways is closer to the aesthetics of Javanese people and further away from the aesthetics of scientific comparative musicologists. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, and thanks for that. So maybe we can move on. I forgot to introduce my two colleagues here. This is Juan Diego Diaz, ethnomusicologist here at UC Davis, and my newest colleague and new father, Scott Linford, who is here. We're really excited to see you.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, and congratulations to all of you. The conference, the second conference around this project was, I think, maybe the first event that I attended in person at UC Davis, and it was so inspiring and interesting, and I'm just delighted to see that it's resulted in this volume. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of reading Dr. Kathy Foley's work, who is a distinguished professor emerita of theater from UC Santa Cruz. And it's a kind of a nice introduction, perhaps, into the Wayang performance, because it concerns Wayang very directly. So her article is entitled Dakwa, Missionizing and Wayang, Hindu, Islamic, Christian, Buddhist. So very briefly, she, in this article, details the way that the Wayang puppetry is entwined with Hindu, Islamic, Buddhist, and Christian streams of spirituality over the past 1,200 years. So very concisely, dealing with a very large historical sweep. And as she writes, quote, the spiritual mission of Wayang is avowed by Dalang puppet masters, who see Wayang as both aesthetic entertainment and vehicle of spiritual communication. So in the article, it begins in the kind of deep history of around the 8th century with the sort of mythological culture bringer Aji Saka, who was a kind of Hindu Buddhist who was using Wayang in that context, and then moves into Islamization in the 15th and 17th centuries, where again Wayang was part of kind of Muslim missionization, so sort of cast in the cultural missionization. And then finally moving to the post-colonial era, where Buddhist, Islamic, and Christian contexts also were making use of Wayang, both Protestant and Catholic. So as she leaves us with the statement that, quote, a puppet form that started with Hindu teaching was adapted for Islamic dakwa and has accommodated Christianity, modern Buddhism, and neo-Islamic spiritual messages, is now caught in an ongoing battle in contemporary Southeast Asia. So it's a really sweeping historical article, but also I was so impressed by how much sort of granular detail you also wove into that, and including your own ethnographic experiences. So I want to encourage everybody to read it. It's a very good read. Dr. Foley, I'm going to give you kind of a choose your own adventure for questions if I can.
Get a prize.
Yeah. Only because I think I had so many, and they're kind of, I'll give you sort of 3 different questions that are all really kind of versions of the same question. And I want to begin with something that you wrote in the conclusion, which is really lovely. She writes that all religions find the spiritual aura, the Wayu in Wayang, useful in affirming that the embodied, the danced, the sounded, and the visualized can launch us into the disembodied, the still, the silent, the unseen, that is the encounter with eternity. So I want to first, this is your first option, okay, which is that because you're a distinguished professor emerita, you've earned the right to really go broad. And I see some other emeritas around, and I love hearing that. So go broad and tell us, how do the performing arts bring us into contact with the divine? Option 1, okay? And then option 2... why Wayang? I mean, what is it about Wayang that all these streams of spirituality embraced it as a tool for kind of cultural missionization and bring us into that? And then option 3 is if you want to talk about perhaps one or two of those particular streams and how the religious influence or the religious philosophy impacted the performance style or the musical style of Wayang. So, for example, you give the example that in Catholic contexts, there's sometimes a preference for choral singing as accompaniment to Wayang rather than gamelan. So, if you wanted to talk more specifically about it in that way.
Okay, I won't talk too specifically because I'm covering thousands of years. I think why Wayang? I mean, I start by saying that I think music gets more FTE and other things like that because it's associated with the Christian tradition where the divine and the human are somewhat separated. So those of us who do physical theater and other things like that will just not get as much status within the thing. People like it, you love your bodies, and you love being with other people. But in the greater hierarchy of things, not too much. I think why Wayang is because it begins, I think, with a Hindu-Buddhist concept of kind of nyasa. How do we use our bodies? You know, this thing that we're given that's very transitory to sort of climb up toward that highest possibility. So rather than hearing the beautiful organ up there and the person singing, or, you know, just all of us jumbling together, not sounding quite as good as the angels and other things, I think that Wayang, by a process of miniaturization, bringing it down so you're picking up, and you have to play all the different stuff. So you're both the demonic and the divine. Stories are very big. They're not confined to the human. So you have to, when you enter into it, realize all these different voices by using different resonators in your body so that you can create different voices for the characters, different musical rhythms, different times of the night for the slow, the fast, or whatever. So I think that the real attraction of Wayang and why the concept of the puppeteer is this process of miniaturization that has nothing to do with you and your voice and your ego, but gives you a smorgasbord of a very wide span to each calon dalang person who wants to study it has to find the different voices by KKK, using the nasal resonator or the ladala, things like that. You have to play the body. You have to learn the different movement. You have to hear the different rhythms that go from the slow and the expansive to the gending prong where the gongs are going all the time. And it's that miniaturization, pushing it down into a small amount of time, that gives this idea of I can understand all things. And the body that I was given, the sex, the age, the class, or whatever, that is the puppet. That is the passing. What the system is about is to stretch you into all that possibility, which is the inheritance from different dalang, and the idea that using this puppet, this body, this voice, these rhythms, those instruments, you can really experience the whole of the cosmos. So I think that is the idea that becomes interesting and gets translated from one system to another, because it is this sort of core spiritual idea of transcendence is possible for the human if you just let go of the self and the ego. And you can find it in music, you can find it in movement, you can find it in time. And that is why, as different, priests and others, once like liberation theology in Vatican II take place, I mean, they've liked it before, and certain dissident groups of Christians have already done it. But, when it gets really broad, people just pick it up, and on the tree of life, you can put the Vatican or things like that. And, you can translate it into the Christian symbols, into the Buddhist symbols. If you're worried about current, more fundamentalist Islam, you can say, oh, this form was created by Sunan Kalijaga, the head of the Wali, who converted all of Southeast Asia and Malaysia. They call him Sikh Malayu as well. And yes, there is a spiritual component and idea, and it's in the practice of the music, the dance, and the wayang.
Thank you, Kathy. That was amazing performance. Yes. Yes. I'm tempted to move to question 3 because we might be inspired by Kathy, but I think instead, the quiz question 3, but instead I think we have some time for further questions from the peanut gallery, if anybody has any. These could conceivably be directed to the panel before as well, or to any of us up here. Anybody? Everyone is so eager to get to this quiz question. Well, what the heck, Beth? Take it. Oh, wait. Did you have a question? Oh, here, let me pass this mic. This is the portable mic.
So this is inspired by my reading of David's chapter, but it's actually a question for all the authors who are here. One of the things that you comment on is the sort of history or the framework of contact theory. So the idea that simply by living side by side, that is a form of missionizing in a way from one culture to the next. Generalization. But I'm wondering about how in your individual chapters you see the role of music making or performance more generally as a site for that kind of contact. Does it fast track contact theory? Is it, a particularly strong catalyst? Or is this a rhetoric that has been, maybe abused in the discourse around contact? I'm thinking, as Carol was, about the context of the California missions, where there's, been sort of discussion that it was all okay because we could make music together. I'm wondering if the individuals that you have researched represent one particular take on that constellation of questions.
I'm not sure I'm answering that question, but the whole idea of contact theory makes a lot of sense. There's always a power imbalance usually when there's contact like that, and certainly in the case of my chapter, Smeding's access to these sorts of things was in part because he was a powerful colonial overlord, or at least an agent of the colonial powers, and so he was able to sort of push his way in to wherever he wanted to go and ask questions, whether they were welcome or not, and shut things down too. I mean, there were events where they decided we don't really want this dancing going on out in front of our church. So I think that we have to modulate the idea of contact theory with this idea of who has the power to take and whether people have the power to not give or not. Do other people have thoughts on this?
The power imbalance you're talking about as sort of an interesting. The power imbalance that you were alluding to, Henry, I think is manifest in sort of an interesting way in the gramophone, where it's something that, you have to have the resources to be able to acquire it. You have to have the resources to be able to get to where you're going, the knowledge to know about these traditions and where you might like to record. And I think that was one of the things that Herkens was particularly concerned about in doing his own research, is that the gramophone has this potential to amplify power imbalances and to perpetuate them as well. And that one of the things I found particularly interesting about his approach to methodology, that he was sort of seeing these things in a broader scale than many comparative ethnomusicologists were considering at that time.
In your chapter, you make a big deal out of the sound object versus Herkens' approach to wanting to know sort of the spiritual gist of the tradition rather than one single artifact. And I think that's one of these power imbalances, or different total concepts that are in friction between Europeans and Indonesians at that time.
Yeah, he was interested in what he called the native psyche, and he saw music as a vehicle into that. I think he admired Kunst for his very scientific approach, but what he was looking for was much more esoteric, and he identified it as the native psyche.
We probably have time for another comment from an author, if that's a thing, or we can move on to the quiz, which is going to be fun.
Is this a
David,
question? Yeah.
Here, we've got one there for you.
Yeah, here we go. Something that's interesting about the missionaries is that they were changed by contact with people that had much less power than they had. And this drastically revises classical contact theory as developed by Gordon Allport in the Nature of Prejudice, the book of 1954 that we usually go to for contact theory. Allport, interestingly, got some of those ideas when he was a missionary educator in Istanbul. And so he had some experience with this himself, but his own sense of contact theory diminishing prejudice did require more or less equal power things. And one thing that I've found so interesting about this missionary stuff is that these characters were transformed by people that had much less power than they did. That's just a variation on the theme.
And that's a fantastic, I hope, sort of a theme of the book in general, is this idea that, I mean, as one-sided as it seemed at times, it was a two-way street. And it created the world we live in now, for better or for worse. I'll have to say it that way. So thank you, everybody. There is a quiz question coming up, but I'd like a round of applause for all of our participants. So Kathy will be thrilled that this is more of an embodied performance question. And I'm going to give you a page number. So you want to go to page 209. Those of you who have copies of the book handy, you've got to do it. Somebody's got to do this. Yes. So everyone getting there?
Yes.
You're much faster at that than I am, Esther. So this is Professor Sumarsam's article about the Chantang Balung. And one of the things that they do is provide vocalizations called Sangga or Alok. And Pak Sumarsam has some transliterations of some of these vocalizations. Whoever can do one of these vocalizations the best will get the prize. So you see there's the one E, Y-O-O-O-O-K, and then Hayuto. Anyway, who wants to do it? Let's hear everyone try A. It's going to be really high-pitched. Jody probably can do this better than anybody. A! A! We can't let Kathy win, right? How about yo? And I can't even imagine Hayuto Yoto. Jody, do you have a sense of that? Hayuto Yoto. It's probably just Hayuto Yoto or something.
Hayuta, yata. I've never heard it.
Okay. Anyway, so now you know the basic parameters. Let's hear A. Ready? Go.
A.
Any standouts here? Am I going to have to call on you one by one? Let's hear the yo. Yo. Ooh, I think I heard one over here. Juan Diego, you're going to win. Okay. Anyway, so can we name Juan Diego the winner?
Yes.
Okay. Get this over with. You have a very special prize. These are Anklung keychains, not Wayang keychains. And actually, there's a refrigerator magnet there, too. Okay, so we have, the Wayang starts at 6 o'clock. I believe there may be some food back there for people to share. Not Indonesian food, sadly, but Thai food, close enough. And Anna Maria and I are available, I think, for book signing, if anybody has a book. There are also cover pages over there that we will be happy to sign for you, that you can hang on your wall in the bathroom and admire forever. And if anybody can figure out how to sign a digital copy, I actually spent a couple hours trying to get my stylist to do this. Couldn't figure out any way to make it happen. But if you know that, we'd be happy to sign with our fingernail or something. Or not, whatever. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming. Anna Maria has a comment?
I still want to say something. I wanted to tell you, first of all, that we had a wonderful podcast. And you can all listen to it for about an hour. And my daughter, younger daughter, who's into podcasts, told me it's the best podcast for academic books. So there's a link on our web page to this podcast. You should all listen to it. And then I want to tell you that my collaboration with Henry was the best I've ever had. Henry it was so much fun, and to do this with my colleague, Thank you, Henry. We didn't quarrel once. It was just such a inspiring adventure. And also, I wanted to thank Chris Acosta, who did copy editing. I was so happy to see him.
Yeah. And I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I should mention that Dustin Wiebe was our postdoc in this project for 2 years, who did a lot of grunt work putting the conferences together, helped with the book proposal, wrote a fantastic essay, which I just reread the other day, and I learned so much from it again. So we're really lucky to have Dustin involved with this project as well. And of course, this fantastic, let's give him a round of applause. And then between Anna Maria and me, we managed to corral a fairly diverse and interesting group of scholars from different parts of the world, from different disciplines, from different kinds of institutional backgrounds. And I think that's something to shoot for in an edited collection. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions to this. And thank you all that are out there for having a little bit of fun with us. And I hope you learned something. Thanks. And finally, thanks to Phil, Josh, Stephen, and Caitlin for putting all this together.